My daddy is so lonely. Can you be my mommy? The Mafia boss's 6-year-old daughter grabbed my wrist in the middle of his party, her voice breaking as she begged loud enough for every dangerous man in that ballroom to hear. My daddy is so lonely. Can you be my mommy? I was just the help, a nobody serving champagne to people who could make me disappear with a phone call, but when Dante Romano's eyes locked onto mine, dark, unreadable, and absolutely lethal, I realized this little girl's desperate question had just made me the most dangerous person in the room. And I had 30 seconds to decide if I was brave enough or stupid enough to answer. The Romano estate that evening seemed suspended between two worlds. Outside, the late November sky bled crimson and gold, the last light catching on the fountain in the courtyard where fallen leaves floated like small ships lost at sea. Inside, crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across marble floors, and somewhere a pianist played Chopin with the kind of precision that felt more like duty than art. The scent of expensive cologne mingled with cigar smoke and the faint sweetness of the roses that stood in towering arrangements throughout the room. Amidst this carefully constructed perfection, a man's loneliness and a girl's silent suffering revealed themselves without warning, without permission. Isabella Romano, Bella to the few people she allowed close, stood in her ivory dress with delicate lace sleeves, her dark curls cascading down her back in ringlets that had taken the housekeeper an hour to perfect. She looked like a porcelain doll, beautiful and fragile and heartbreakingly alone. Despite being surrounded by luxury most children couldn't imagine, her eyes held an emptiness that money had never been able to fill. Her father, Dante Romano, moved through the crowd with the easy authority of a man who owned everything he touched. At 37, he was striking rather than handsome, sharp jawline, dark eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of presence that made people step aside before he had to ask. His tailored black suit fit like armor, and in many ways it was. Every handshake was calculated. Every smile was strategy. He'd built an empire on fear and respect, but he'd forgotten how to build a relationship with his own daughter. And then there was Natalie, invisible in her catering uniform, carrying trays of champagne through a world that looked right through her. At 28, she'd perfected the art of being unseen. After the accident that took her family 3 years ago, after the medical bills and the eviction and the slow erosion of everything she'd once believed in, Natalie had learned that the safest place to be was nowhere at all. The meeting between these three souls didn't go unnoticed. Conversations paused. Eyes turned. Even the piano seemed to hesitate, and in that crystalline moment, the entire ballroom held its breath. Because it wasn't just a child asking for company. It was a life asking for transformation. It was fate reaching down with small, desperate fingers. And nothing would ever be the same. If you want to see where this impossible connection leads, make sure you're subscribed. This is just the beginning. 10 hours earlier, Bella had sat cross-legged on the Persian rug in her bedroom, arranging her dolls in a perfect circle. The silence in the Romano mansion was the kind that echoed, broken only by the distant hum of the security system and the tick of the antique clock in the hallway below. "Papa should be home soon," she whispered to her favorite doll, Emilia, straightening the tiny blue dress with careful fingers. "Maybe today he'll have dinner with us." But even as she said it, Bella knew better. Her father rarely made it home before 9 in the evening, and when he did, he smelled like the office. Paper and coffee and the cologne he wore like another layer of armor. Bella was 6 years old, but she'd already learned that love and presence weren't the same thing. The sound of heels on marble announced the arrival of Mrs. Castellano, the housekeeper who'd taken over childcare duties after the latest nanny quit. The woman appeared in the doorway, her expression already showing signs of strain. "Bella, cara, it's time for your piano practice," Mrs. Castellano called, her voice gentle but tired. "I don't want to practice," Bella replied without looking up. "When is Papa coming home?" "You know your father is very busy, sweetheart. He has important meetings, important people depending on him." Important people. Bella turned those words over in her mind. She wondered if she counted as important, or if daughters fell into a different category. Loved, perhaps, but not prioritized. "I don't care about meetings," Bella said, and her voice cracked in a way that made Mrs. Castellano's face soften with sympathy. "I just want Papa." The housekeeper sighed, recognizing the familiar ache in the child's voice. In the past year alone, 5 nannies had tried and failed to reach Bella. The little girl wasn't difficult. She was simply a child crying out for her father's attention in the only way she knew how. By refusing everyone else's. At that same moment, 3 floors below in his private office, Dante Romano stood at his desk reviewing contracts that would reshape the Eastern Seaboard's shipping route. Numbers, logistics, leverage points. These were languages he spoke fluently. His daughter's silence was a language he couldn't seem to translate. His phone buzzed. Another message from his consigliera about tonight's gathering. "Everything is prepared, boss. The Salvatores will be here at 8. Don't be late to your own party." Dante's jaw tightened. He didn't want to host a party. He wanted to be anywhere but in a room full of people who smiled while calculating how to betray him. But power demanded performance. Respect required visibility. He glanced at the silver-framed photograph on his desk, the only personal item in the entire room. Bella at age 3, laughing in a way she didn't anymore, held in the arms of a woman with kind eyes and dark hair. Lucia. 3 years dead, and the wound still felt fresh. He'd loved her with a ferocity that terrified him, and when she died in that car accident, something in him had calcified. He'd locked his heart away and thrown himself into the only thing he could control. His empire. But Bella was suffering. He could see it in the way she barely touched her food, in the way she watched the door like she was waiting for someone who would never return. "She's waiting for her mother," he told himself. "There's nothing I can do about that." But deep down, he knew she was also waiting for him. For the father who disappeared into work and grief, and the comfortable numbness of emotional distance. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Boss, you need to get ready." Luca, his second-in-command, stepped inside. "Guests are arriving in 2 hours." Dante nodded, closing the contract. "Where's Bella?" "In her room. Mrs. Castellano says she won't come down. Says she doesn't like parties." Smart girl, Dante thought. He didn't like them either. "I'll talk to her," he said, though he had no idea what he'd say. Lately, every conversation with his daughter felt like navigating a minefield. One wrong word and she'd retreat further into herself. He found her exactly where Luca said she'd be, sitting among her dolls, looking small and sad in a room filled with everything a child could want except the one thing she needed. "Bella," he said softly from the doorway. Her head snapped up, and for just a moment, her face lit up with pure joy. "Papa!" She ran to him, and Dante caught her, holding her tight and breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. For these brief seconds the walls came down. For these seconds, he was just a father holding his daughter. "You're home early," Bella said, pulling back to look at his face like she was memorizing it. "I have a party tonight," Dante explained. "Downstairs. I was hoping you'd make an appearance. Just for a little while." Bella's face fell. "I don't like your parties. Everyone's scary." "They're not scary, Principessa. They're just businessmen. They have guns," Bella said matter-of-factly. "And they talk about hurting people." Dante's chest tightened. She was too perceptive, too aware of the world he'd tried to shelter her from. "What if," he said carefully, "you came down just for half an hour? You could wear your pretty white dress. And afterward, I promise we'll have gelato. Just you and me." Bella's eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, the broken promise. She'd heard "I promise" before. "Really?" she whispered. "Really?" She nodded slowly. "Okay, Papa. But you have to stay with me. Don't leave me alone with the scary men." "I won't," Dante promised, though he knew that promise was already half broken. The Salvatores would demand his attention, and Bella would end up alone again. He always let her down. It was becoming a pattern he didn't know how to break. Across the city, in a studio apartment with peeling wallpaper and a radiator that clanked through the night, Natalie Cross was getting ready for a job she didn't want. The catering company had called that afternoon, desperate. One of their regular servers had called in sick for the Romano party, and they needed someone who could step in last minute. The pay was $200 cash, 4 times the usual rate. Danger pay, Natalie had thought. She'd heard the name Romano before. Everyone in the city had. You didn't ask questions about men like that. But $200 meant her rent would be paid. It meant she could buy groceries instead of rationing instant noodles. It meant survival for another month. So she'd said yes. Now, buttoning the crisp white shirt and black slacks that served as her uniform, Natalie caught her reflection in the cracked mirror above her dresser. She looked tired. She always looked tired these days. The life had gone out of her eyes somewhere between her family's funeral and the 7th job rejection. She didn't dream anymore. She just endured. Her phone buzzed with the details. Romano Estate. 7 p.m. sharp. Enter through service entrance. Keep your head down and your mouth shut. Natalie grabbed her jacket and headed out into the November cold, having no idea that in a few hours, a little girl with desperate eyes would ask her a question that would change everything. Natalie had been serving champagne for 90 minutes when the little girl found her. She was refilling her tray in the corner of the ballroom, trying to remain unnoticed among the marble columns and elaborate floral arrangements, when she felt small fingers tug gently at her sleeve. Natalie turned to find the sad girl from the staircase standing there, her green eyes wide and shimmering with unshed tears. "Hello," Natalie whispered, crouching down to the child's level. Up close, she could see the careful details, the pearl clips in her dark curls, the expensive lace of her dress, the way her small hands twisted together nervously. "You look lonely too," the girl said simply, and the observation hit Natalie like a punch to the chest. What's your name, sweetheart?" "Isabella. But everyone calls me Bella." Her voice was soft, careful, like she wasn't used to people actually listening. "What's yours?" "Natalie." "That's pretty." Bella stepped closer, studying Natalie's face with an intensity that felt ancient in someone so young. "Do you have a little girl?" "No, I don't." "Do you want one?" The question lodged itself somewhere between Natalie's ribs. Before the accident, before everything fell apart, she'd imagined having children someday. A family. A life that meant something beyond just surviving. I think so. Someday. Bella's face brightened with something that looked like hope, fragile and desperate. She reached out and took Natalie's hand, her small fingers cold and trembling. "My daddy is so lonely," Bella said, her voice cracking. "He tries to hide it, but I can tell. He doesn't smile anymore. Not really. And I don't have a mommy. She went to heaven when I was little." Natalie's heart shattered. "Oh, Bella. I'm so sorry. Can you be my mommy?" The words tumbled out in a rush, raw and pleading. "Please? Just for tonight? My daddy's having this party and everyone here is scary and mean and nobody ever smiles at me like you did and I just want someone who's warm." Before Natalie could answer, before she could process the impossibility of what this child was asking, Bella pulled her forward, threading through the crowd with surprising determination. "Bella, wait." But the girl didn't stop. She pulled Natalie directly into the center of the ballroom, where the most dangerous-looking men stood in a circle, their conversation dying as they noticed the child and the server interrupting them. And there, at the center of that circle, stood a man who could only be Bella's father. Dante Romano turned, his dark eyes locking onto Natalie's, and the world seemed to tilt. "Papa," Bella announced, her voice clear and desperate and heartbreakingly brave. "This is Natalie. She's lonely like us. Can she stay? Can she be my mommy? Please." The silence that followed was absolute. The ballroom felt like it had been frozen in ice. Every eye in the room fixed on them. The little girl, the server in the plain black uniform, and the most powerful man in the city. Natalie wanted to disappear, to sink through the marble floor and never resurface. Heat flooded her cheeks as she registered the expressions around her. Amusement, curiosity, and something darker in the eyes of several men who looked at her like she was prey. Dante's face was unreadable, carved from stone. But Natalie saw the muscle tick in his jaw, the way his fingers tightened around the glass of whiskey he was holding. "Bella," he said quietly, his voice carrying a warning that made the child flinch. "What did we talk about?" "But Papa, go to your room." The words were soft but final, edged with an authority that suggested he wasn't used to being disobeyed. Bella's eyes filled with tears. "I just thought." "Now, Isabella." The little girl's face crumpled. She released Natalie's hand and ran toward the staircase, her sobs echoing across the marble floors. Natalie's instinct screamed at her to follow, to comfort the child, but she was paralyzed under Dante's gaze. He turned those dark eyes on her, and Natalie felt stripped bare, examined, catalogued. "You're with the catering service," he stated. Not a question. "Yes, sir. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." "What did you say to her?" His voice was controlled, but underneath it, Natalie heard something dangerous. "Nothing. I swear. She came to me. She asked my name and I told her, and then she just..." Natalie's words tumbled over themselves. "I would never presume to." "Luca," Dante said without looking away from Natalie, "escort this woman out. And make sure the catering company understands that their employees need better training in boundaries." A tall man with cold eyes stepped forward, his hand moving to Natalie's elbow. "Wait," Natalie said, finding her voice despite the fear coursing through her. "She's just a little girl who's hurting. You can fire me, fine. But don't punish her for wanting something every child deserves." The room went utterly silent. Dante's eyes flashed with something, anger, maybe, or surprise that someone had dared to speak to him that way. He took a step closer, and Natalie could smell his cologne, expensive and cedar-sharp. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said, his voice low and lethal. "You don't know my daughter. You don't know me. And you have no right to stand in my home and tell me how to raise my child." "You're right," Natalie said, and she was trembling now but couldn't seem to stop herself. "I don't know you. But I know what loneliness looks like. And that little girl is drowning in it." For a moment, something flickered across Dante's face. Pain, recognition, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Get her out of here," he told Luca. As the man's grip tightened on her arm, Natalie caught one last glimpse of the staircase where Bella had disappeared. And she saw the small figure sitting in the shadows, watching, tears streaming down her face. Natalie had made it as far as the service entrance when the screaming started. Even through the thick walls of the Romano mansion, she could hear it, a child's desperate, terrified wailing that made her blood run cold. Luca's grip on her arm loosened as his radio crackled to life. "We have a situation." The girl locked herself in her room. The voice on the other end paused. "She's asking for the woman. The server." Luca's eyes cut to Natalie, something like concern flickering across his usually impassive face. "Wait here," he ordered, then disappeared back into the mansion. Natalie stood frozen in the doorway. Every rational instinct told her to run, to get as far away from this world as possible. But that sound, Bella's anguished crying, wrapped around her heart and wouldn't let go. "She's not your responsibility. You can't save everyone. You can barely save yourself." But her feet wouldn't move. 3 minutes later, Luca reappeared, and behind him, looking more rattled than she'd thought possible, was Dante Romano. "She won't open the door," Dante said, and his voice was stripped of its earlier authority. Now he just sounded like a terrified father. "She's having a panic attack. This has happened before, but never like this. She's saying..." He stopped, his jaw working. "She's saying she wants you." Natalie blinked. "Me? I don't understand it either. But my daughter is hurting, and apparently you're the only one she'll respond to." The admission clearly cost him. Pride and desperation warred across his features. "I'm asking you to come back inside. Please." The please was what did it. This man who commanded empires, who made dangerous men step aside with a glance, was asking her for help. "Okay," Natalie whispered. They moved through the mansion quickly, the party continuing below as if a child's heart wasn't breaking 3 floors above. When they reached Bella's door, Natalie could hear her sobbing, gasping for breath. "Bella," Natalie called gently, kneeling by the door. "Sweetheart, it's Natalie. Can you open the door?" The crying stuttered, quieted. "You came back." Bella's voice was small, muffled. "I came back. I'm right here. Papa said you had to leave. He said I was bad." Dante flinched like he'd been struck. "I never said that, Principessa. Your papa asked me to come see you," Natalie interrupted softly. "Because he loves you very much and he's worried about you. Can you let us in?" Silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then the lock clicked. The door opened to reveal Bella's tear-stained face, her careful curls now disheveled, her white dress wrinkled. She looked at Natalie, then at her father, then back to Natalie. "Will you stay?" she whispered. "Just for a little while?" Natalie glanced at Dante. His expression was unreadable, but he gave a single, slight nod. "I'll stay," Natalie promised. And she stepped across the threshold into a world she didn't understand, pulled by the gravity of a little girl's desperate need. Bella's room was a child's paradise, canopy bed draped in silk, shelves lined with dolls from around the world, a window seat overlooking the garden. But what caught Natalie's attention was the shrine on the nightstand. A photograph in a silver frame. A woman with kind eyes and Bella's same dark curls, laughing as she held a baby. "That's my mama," Bella said quietly, following Natalie's gaze. She climbed onto her bed, patting the space beside her. Natalie sat, acutely aware of Dante standing in the doorway, watching. "She's beautiful," Natalie said softly. "She died when I was 3. Papa says it was an accident. A car went off a bridge." Bella picked up the frame, tracing her mother's face with one finger. "I don't remember her voice anymore. Sometimes I try really hard, but I can't hear it." Natalie's throat tightened. "I lost my family too. My parents and my little brother. 3 years ago." Bella's head snapped up. "All of them. All of them. Car accident like your mama." The words still felt like glass in her mouth. "My brother was 7. His name was Danny." From the doorway, she heard Dante's sharp intake of breath. "Do you remember his voice?" Bella asked. "Every word," Natalie whispered. "He used to sing this silly song about a turtle. Off-key, every single time. I'd give anything to hear it again." Bella was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she scooted closer to Natalie, resting her small head against her shoulder. "Is that why you look sad?" "Like me." "Yeah, sweetheart. That's why. Papa looks sad too. But he pretends he's not." Bella's voice dropped to a whisper. "He doesn't talk about Mama anymore. He took all her pictures down except this one, and he works all the time so he doesn't have to think about her. Mrs. Castellano told me." "Bella," Dante's voice was rough, warning. But the little girl continued. "He thinks I don't know. But I hear him sometimes, late at night. He goes into his office and he cries. He thinks nobody can hear, but I do." The confession hung in the air like a living thing. Natalie turned to look at Dante, and what she saw in his face made her chest ache. The armor had cracked. His eyes were bright with unshed tears, his jaw clenched against emotion he'd clearly been holding back for years. "She wasn't supposed to be driving that night," he said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was supposed to pick up the medication. But I had a meeting. Always another meeting. So Lucia went instead, and the roads were wet and—" He stopped, his hand gripping the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "You blame yourself," Natalie said gently. "It wasn't a question. Every single day. So you disappeared into work. into being untouchable. It was easier than feeling. His eyes met hers, and Natalie saw the truth there, the same survival mechanism she'd employed. Numbness over pain. Distance over connection. "I know," she whispered. "I did the same thing." Bella fell asleep an hour later, curled against Natalie's side with one small hand clutching her sleeve. Her breathing had finally evened out, her tear-stained face peaceful for the first time that night. Natalie carefully extracted herself and tucked the blanket around the little girl. When she turned, Dante was still there, sitting now in the chair by the window, watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I haven't seen her sleep that peacefully in months. She's exhausted. Emotionally, I mean." Natalie moved toward the door, keeping her voice low. "She's carrying too much for someone so small." "I know." Dante stood, and they stepped into the hallway together, pulling the door mostly closed. "I don't know how to fix it. I give her everything. Except yourself." The words were gentle, but they landed hard. Dante's shoulders sagged, and for the first time, Natalie didn't see the dangerous Mafia boss. She saw a broken man trying to hold himself together with nothing but willpower and distance. "I don't know how," he admitted. "After Lucia died, I put everything into protecting Bella. Security, nannies, the best schools. But being close to her," his voice cracked. "Every time I look at her, I see Lucia. And I remember that I failed to protect the most important person in my world. How do I trust myself not to fail Bella too?" Natalie's heart twisted. "By showing up. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." They walked downstairs together, the party long since ended, the mansion quiet except for the cleaning staff moving like ghosts through the rooms. Dante led her to the kitchen, surprisingly modest compared to the opulence of the rest of the house. "Coffee," he offered. "It's almost midnight. Neither of us is sleeping tonight anyway." He was right. Natalie watched as this powerful man moved around the kitchen with surprising domesticity, preparing coffee with the kind of focus he probably gave to million-dollar deals. "You didn't have to do this," Dante said as he handed her a cup. "Stay. Help with Bella. You could have walked away." "I tried," Natalie admitted. "But I couldn't leave her crying like that. I know what it's like to feel invisible, to be surrounded by people who don't really see you." "Is that how you feel? Invisible?" "Every day since my family died. Like I'm just going through the motions. Surviving but not living." Dante was quiet for a long moment, studying her over the rim of his cup. "You're not invisible," he said finally. "Not to Bella. And not to me." The air between them shifted, charged with something neither of them was ready to name. "I should go," Natalie said, though she didn't move. "It's late and you have." "Stay." The word came out rough, almost desperate. "Not forever. Just finish your coffee. Let me pretend for 5 more minutes that there's someone in this house who understands." So Natalie stayed. They talked until 2 in the morning, about loss and guilt, about the people they used to be before grief rewrote them. Dante told her about Lucia's laugh, how she'd been the only person who ever made him feel human. Natalie told him about Danny's turtle song, about her parents' Sunday dinners, about the life that felt like it belonged to someone else now. And slowly, carefully, 2 broken people began to feel a little less alone. Natalie returned to the Romano estate the next evening. Not because she'd been hired. The catering company had made it clear she was no longer needed. But because Bella had called her, the little girl's voice small and hopeful on the phone. "Papa said you could come for dinner. If you want to." "Do you want to?" How could she say no? But the moment Natalie stepped through the front door, she knew something was wrong. The air felt different, tense, dangerous. Luca met her in the foyer, his expression grave. "Miss Cross, Mr. Romano is expecting you in his office." Not the dining room. Not Bella's room. His office. Natalie's stomach dropped. Dante stood behind his massive desk, and the warmth from last night had vanished. He was the cold, untouchable boss again, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Sit," he said without preamble. "What's going on? Where's Bella? Answer a question for me first." Dante slid a folder across the desk. "Why didn't you tell me you were investigated for child endangerment 2 years ago?" The blood drained from Natalie's face. "What? My security team runs background checks on everyone who enters this house. You've been here twice now, around my daughter, and this morning I received a very interesting report." Natalie's hands trembled as she opened the folder. There it was, the worst moment of her life, reduced to cold facts and legal language. The accusations, the investigation, the exoneration that came too late to save her reputation. "It was a lie," she whispered. "The family I was babysitting for. Their son fell off the playground equipment at the park, broke his arm. They tried to sue me, claimed I was negligent. But I was cleared. Completely cleared. The investigation found that you were distracted, grief-stricken over your family's recent death, not fit for childcare." Dante's voice was ice. "That's not what it said. They dropped all charges." The boy's father admitted, he was just trying to avoid medical bills. "You should have told me." Dante's fist slammed on the desk. "Do you understand what you could have cost me? If something had happened to Bella while you were here, if my enemies discovered I'd allowed someone with that kind of record near my daughter, I would never hurt her." Natalie stood, tears streaming down her face. "You know that. After last night, after everything we talked about. Last night was a mistake." The words were surgical, precise, designed to cut. "I let my guard down. I forgot that in my world, trust is a liability. Everyone wants something, Miss Cross. What is it you want? Money? Access to my organization? A meal ticket?" The accusation hit Natalie like a physical blow. "You think I'm using Bella? I think you saw an opportunity. A lonely child. A wealthy father. It's not the first time someone's tried. You're wrong." Natalie's voice shook with fury and heartbreak. "I came back because that little girl asked me to. Because she's hurting and lonely and she deserves better than a father who's too scared to love her. Get out." "Gladly." Natalie turned toward the door, then stopped. "You know what the saddest part is? You're doing to Bella exactly what that family did to me. You're so terrified of being hurt that you're pushing away the people who actually care. And she's the one who'll pay the price." I said get out. Natalie left, her vision blurred with tears. She didn't see Bella standing at the top of the stairs, clutching her doll, having heard everything. 3 days passed in silence. Natalie went back to her apartment, back to her other jobs, back to the hollow routine of survival. But everything felt different now. The numbness that had protected her for 3 years had cracked open, and she couldn't seem to seal it closed again. She'd let herself hope, let herself feel, and it had shattered her all over again. On the 4th morning, there was a knock at her door. Natalie opened it to find not Dante, but Luca, looking uncomfortable in her dingy hallway. "Miss Cross, may I come in?" She almost said no, almost slammed the door. But curiosity won. "Fine." Luca stepped inside, glancing around her tiny studio with an expression that might have been pity. "The boss doesn't know I'm here," he said without preamble. "And I could lose my position for this. But you need to know something. I don't want to hear. Bella hasn't spoken since you left." The words hit Natalie like ice water. "What?" "Not a single word in 4 days. She won't eat, won't sleep, just sits in her room holding that doll and staring at nothing." Luca's jaw tightened. "I've worked for Dante Romano for 15 years. I've seen him take down empires. But I've never seen him as destroyed as he is right now." "He made his choice," Natalie said, but her voice wavered. "He made the wrong choice. Out of fear." Luca pulled an envelope from his jacket. "He wrote this. I don't know what it says. But he's been carrying it for 2 days, too much of a coward to deliver it himself." He set the envelope on her counter and headed for the door. Then he paused. That little girl loves you. And my boss, whether he admits it or not, he does too. Question is, are you brave enough to let them? When he left, Natalie stared at the envelope for a full hour before opening it. The handwriting was surprisingly elegant, the words painfully honest. Natalie, I've built an empire on control, on never showing weakness, on protecting myself by keeping everyone at a distance, and then you walked into my home and dismantled every defense I'd spent years constructing. You're right. I'm terrified. Terrified of losing someone again. Terrified of failing Bella the way I failed Lucia. Terrified that if I let myself love you, the universe will take you too. But I'm more terrified of the alternative. Of watching my daughter fade away because I was too broken to accept the gift you were offering. Of spending the rest of my life wondering what we could have been. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve another chance. But Bella deserves a mother who sees her. Who stays. Who loves her not because she's paid to, but because she chooses to. And I deserve to be brave enough to choose love over fear. If you can forgive me, come to the house tomorrow at 6. If not, I'll understand. But please know that you changed us. Both of us. And I'll spend the rest of my life grateful for that, even if I'm spending it alone. Dante. Natalie read it 3 times, tears falling onto the paper, smudging the ink. Then she made her choice. That's today's story. If it moved you, please like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from in the comments. It means more than you know.